Gbenga had barely finished eating the hot yam and egg sauce Auntie Rose had prepared before exhaustion overtook him. His body felt heavy, and the warmth of the food had lulled him into a deep sleep. He lay on Auntie Rose's sofa, his chest rising and falling slowly as he finally rested. For a moment, he looked peaceful, his face relaxed for the first time in days. Auntie Rose sat nearby, watching him with a heavy heart. She couldn't understand how his own family could treat him with such cruelty. Gbenga was a man who had worked hard, who had given everything to his family. Yet, here he was, abandoned and humiliated. As she thought about everything, her eyes stung with tears, but she held them back. Gbenga needed her to be strong. The evening sun began to set when Gbenga finally stirred, the sky outside was dim, and the sound of crickets filled the air. He opened his eyes slowly, his body still aching but feeling a little stronger than before. "You're awake," Auntie Rose said softly, walking over to him. "How are you feeling now?" Gbenga sat up slowly, his hand on his chest as he tried to steady his breathing. "Better," he said, his voice still hoarse but grateful. "Thank you, Auntie Rose. You've done more for me than I could ever repay." "Don't mention it," she replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not a burden. You're a human being, and you deserve care. Now, let me take you home before it gets too dark." Gbenga hesitated, his heart sinking at the thought of returning to the house where he was treated like an outcast. "I don't know if they'll even let me in," he said quietly, looking down at his hands. "Let's try," Auntie Rose said firmly. "If nothing else, they need to see that someone still values you." With her support, Gbenga rose to his feet. She draped a light shawl around his shoulders and helped him to the door. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, and the air carried a damp chill. Together, they walked to Gbenga's house, her arm steadying him as he took each slow, painful step. When they reached the doorstep, Auntie Rose knocked firmly on the door. Inside, they could hear muffled voices and the sound of the television. After a moment, the door opened, and Sade stood there, her face twisting into a scowl the moment she saw them. "What are you doing here?" Sade asked sharply, her eyes darting between Gbenga and Auntie Rose. "I've brought Gbenga back home," Auntie Rose replied, her tone calm but firm. "It's getting late, and he needs to rest." Sade let out a bitter laugh, folding her arms across her chest. "You should have kept him. We don't want him here," she snapped. "Didn't I warn you to stay out of our business?" "Sade, he's your husband," Auntie Rose said, her voice rising slightly. "How can you say you don't want him in his own house? He's sick and weak, and you're treating him worse than an animal." "My husband?" Sade spat. "This man is no husband of mine. He's just a burden now, and I won't let you come here pretending to be a saint. If you care so much, take him with you." Auntie Rose's mouth fell open in shock. "Do you hear yourself? Is this the same man who worked day and night to provide for you and your children? How can you be so heartless?" The commotion brought the children to the door. Deji, Tai-Tai, and Kunnel stood behind their mother, watching the scene with indifference. Tai-Tai rolled her eyes and muttered, "Why does she keep bringing him back? Can't she mind her business?" Deji crossed his arms and said coldly, "If she likes, she can take him. He's not our problem." Gbenga stood there silently, his head bowed. Their words cut through him like a knife, but he didn't have the strength to argue. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he quickly blinked them away, refusing to let them see his pain. Sade stepped forward, pointing a finger at Auntie Rose. "Let me warn you for the last time," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Stay away from my family. If you like this man so much, take him and go. Don't ever bring him back here." Auntie Rose shook her head, her own tears threatening to spill. She grabbed Gbenga's arm gently, pulling him away from the house. "Let's go," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You don't deserve this." As they walked back to her apartment, Gbenga's tears began to fall freely. He tried to hide his face, but Auntie Rose saw his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her own tears joined his, spilling down her cheeks as she struggled to understand how a family could reject their own. When they reached her apartment, Auntie Rose helped Gbenga inside and sat him down on the sofa. She knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. "Gbenga, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know why they're treating you like this, but you don't deserve it. You're a good man, and you deserve love and respect." Gbenga looked at her, his face wet with tears. "What did I do wrong, Auntie Rose?" he asked. "All I ever wanted was to give them a good life. Now, I've lost everything, my health, my job, and even my family." Auntie Rose squeezed his hands tightly, her own tears falling. "You've done nothing wrong, Gbenga. Sometimes, people forget the good in others when times are hard. But you're not alone. I'm here for you." They cried together in the dimly lit room, the weight of Gbenga's suffering hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only their shared pain and a fragile glimmer of hope. In that moment, Gbenga felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt seen, heard, and cared for. That night was one of the heaviest nights for Auntie Rose. After the confrontation at Gbenga's house, she was emotionally drained, but she couldn't imagine how much worse it was for him. She watched as Gbenga sat on her sofa, staring blankly at the wall. His eyes were bloodshot, and his shoulders slumped under the weight of his pain. "You should rest," Auntie Rose said softly, breaking the silence. She brought a small pillow and placed it behind his head. Gbenga nodded weakly and lay down on the sofa, his frail body almost disappearing into the cushions. "I'll sleep here, on the floor," Auntie Rose added, spreading a wrapper for herself beside the sofa. She couldn't bring herself to leave him alone, not in the state he was in. "Thank you, Auntie Rose," Gbenga murmured, his voice faint but filled with gratitude. As the night stretched on, Auntie Rose stayed awake, her eyes fixed on Gbenga. The sound of his breathing was labored, and every so often, a painful cough would rack his body. She felt tears sting her eyes as she thought about everything he had endured. A man who had once been full of life, now reduced to this. She dozed off briefly but woke up every time Gbenga coughed or shifted. The hours dragged, and when the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Auntie Rose sat up and checked on him. "Gbenga," she called softly, reaching out to touch his hand. He didn't move. "Gbenga," she said again, louder this time, shaking him gently. His body was still, his breathing faint. Panic gripped her chest as she placed a hand on his forehead. It was cold and clammy. "Gbenga," she cried, her voice trembling. She shook him harder, but there was no response. Her heart raced as she stood up, pacing the room in fear. "What do I do? God, help me," she whispered. Then, without wasting another second, she grabbed her phone and called a cab. "Please, I need to get to the hospital." "It's an emergency," she said hurriedly, giving the driver her address. The cab arrived within minutes, and Auntie Rose managed to help Gbenga to his feet, supporting his limp body as they made their way outside. Her neighbors watched curiously, some whispering among themselves, but she ignored them. All that mattered was getting Gbenga the help he needed. The ride to the hospital felt like an eternity. Gbenga's head rested against Auntie Rose's shoulder, his breaths shallow and weak. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered prayers under her breath. "God, please don't let anything happen to him. He's suffered enough." When they arrived at the hospital, nurses rushed to help as soon as they saw Gbenga's condition. They placed him on a stretcher and wheeled him into the emergency room while Auntie Rose followed closely behind, her heart pounding in her chest. "Madam, you'll have to wait here," one of the nurses said, stopping her at the door. "But," Auntie Rose began, her voice cracking. "We'll do everything we can," the nurse assured her before disappearing into the room with Gbenga. Auntie Rose sank into one of the chairs in the waiting area, her hands trembling. The cold, sterile environment of the hospital only heightened her anxiety. She looked around, noticing other families huddled together, some crying, others praying. She felt so alone, yet her determination to be there for Gbenga gave her strength. Minutes turned into hours as she sat there, her thoughts consumed with worry. Memories of Gbenga's suffering played in her mind like a cruel movie, his weak frame, his cough, the way his own family had rejected him. She clenched her fists, anger mixing with her sadness. "Why does life have to be so unfair?" she whispered to herself. Finally, a doctor emerged from the emergency room, his face serious but calm. Auntie Rose jumped to her feet, her heart in her throat. "How is he, doctor? Is he okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor sighed and adjusted his glasses. He's stable for now, but his condition is critical. He's severely malnourished and dehydrated, and his tuberculosis has worsened. We've started treatment, but he needs intensive care and proper nutrition to recover. Auntie Rose's legs felt weak, and she held onto the chair for support. Can I see him? She asked. The doctor nodded. You can, but only for a few minutes. He needs rest. A nurse led Auntie Rose into the room where Gbenga lay. He looked even smaller on the hospital bed, his body connected to various tubes and monitors. His chest rose and fell slowly, and his face was pale. Auntie Rose bit her lip to hold back her tears as she approached the bed. Gbenga, she called softly, her voice breaking. It's me, Auntie Rose. You're going to be okay. You're in the hospital now, and the doctors are taking care of you. There was no response, but she noticed his fingers twitch slightly. She reached out and held his hand, her tears finally spilling over. You have to fight, Gbenga, she whispered. You've been through so much, but you're not alone. I'm here for you, and I won't give up on you. For a moment, she thought she saw his lips move, as if he was trying to say something, but his eyes remained closed. A nurse gently touched her shoulder. Madam, it's time to let him rest. Reluctantly, Auntie Rose released his hand and stepped back. She gave one last glance at Gbenga before leaving the room, her heart heavy but hopeful. Back in the waiting area, she sat down and buried her face in her hands. She couldn't help but think about his family. Did they even care that Gbenga was fighting for his life? Would they come if they knew he was here? Her anger flared again, but she pushed it aside. Right now, her focus was on Gbenga. As the night wore on, Auntie Rose remained in the hospital, refusing to leave. She paced the hallways, prayed silently, and kept checking in with the nurses for updates. She was determined to see him pull through, no matter what it took. By morning, she was still there, exhausted but resolute. She knew the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but she had made a silent promise to herself: she would not abandon Gbenga, no matter how hard things became. The next morning, Auntie Rose finally decided to return home. She hadn't slept properly, and her body was aching, but she couldn't stop thinking about Gbenga. He still hadn't woken up, and the doctors had told her that his condition was fragile. As she walked through the hospital gates, the weight of everything pressed down on her heart. She knew she had to inform his family, no matter how cold they had been. When she arrived at Gbenga's flat, the compound was quiet. She knocked on the door, her hands trembling slightly. After a few moments, the door opened, and Sade stood there, her face as stern as ever. What do you want, Auntie Rose? Sade asked, her voice laced with irritation. Sade, Auntie Rose began, her tone soft but urgent. Gbenga is in the hospital. He's very sick, and the doctors are doing their best, but he needs his family. He hasn't woken up since yesterday. Sade crossed her arms and hissed loudly. And so? What do you expect me to do? Gbenga is your problem now. If you care so much about him, go and take care of him. I don't have time for this nonsense. Auntie Rose's heart sank. Sade, this is your husband, she pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes. He's fighting for his life. Can't you at least show some concern? The children. Before she could finish, Sade cut her off. Please, don't involve me or my children in this. If you like, carry him on your head. I don't care. Just leave my house. With that, Sade slammed the door in Auntie Rose's face, the sound echoing in the quiet compound. Auntie Rose stood there, stunned. Tears streamed down her face as she turned and walked away. Her chest felt tight, and every step back to her apartment felt heavier than the last. How could a woman be so heartless toward the man she once loved? How could she teach her children to treat their father like he was nothing? When Auntie Rose reached her apartment, she sat down on her bed and let the tears flow freely. She wept for Gbenga, for the pain he was going through, and for the love that he so desperately deserved but never received. But as the tears dried, she wiped her face and stood up. I can't let this break me, she whispered to herself. Gbenga needs me now. Determined, Auntie Rose went to her small kitchen and began preparing food. She made a pot of hot yam porridge, rich with vegetables and spices. She also boiled some water, pouring it into a flask to keep it warm. As she worked, she prayed silently, asking God to give her strength and to watch over Gbenga. Once everything was ready, she packed the food and flask into a bag and made her way back to the hospital. The journey felt longer this time, her heart heavy with worry. She didn't know what she would find when she arrived. Would Gbenga still be unconscious? Would the doctors bring good news, or would it be worse? When she reached the hospital, she hurried to Gbenga's room. The sight of him lying there, still as death, made her heart clench. His face was pale, his chest rising and falling so faintly it was almost imperceptible. The monitors beeped softly, a reminder of the thin thread of life he was clinging to. Gbenga, she called gently, placing her bag on the table beside him. It's me, Auntie Rose. I've brought food for you. I even boiled water to clean you up when you wake up. But Gbenga didn't respond. His eyes remained closed, his body motionless. Auntie Rose pulled a chair closer and sat by his side, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch his arm. His skin felt cold, and fear surged through her like a tidal wave. Gbenga, please wake up, she whispered, her voice breaking. You've been through so much, but you can't give up now. I'm here with you. You're not alone. Tears streamed down her face as she leaned closer, her hand clutching his tightly. She had never felt so helpless in her life. The man who had endured so much rejection, so much suffering, now lay at the brink of death, and there was nothing she could do to change it. A nurse entered the room, carrying a clipboard. She looked at Auntie Rose with a kind but tired expression. How is he, nurse? Auntie Rose asked, her voice shaky. The nurse sighed. He's stable, but he's very weak. He needs all the care and support he can get. Are you his relative? Auntie Rose hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes. I'm the one taking care of him. The nurse smiled faintly. You're doing a good job. Patients like him need love and attention. It can make all the difference. After the nurse left, Auntie Rose sat by Gbenga's side, praying quietly. She placed the hot flask on the table and arranged the food neatly, hoping that when he woke up, he would see it and know someone cared. As the hours passed, her fear grew. Gbenga's lack of response weighed heavily on her heart. She rested her head on the edge of the bed, her tears soaking the bedsheet. Please, God, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Don't let him go. Don't let him die like this. The night crept in, the hospital growing quieter as the sounds of the day faded. Auntie Rose remained by Gbenga's side, her heart aching with every moment that passed. Though she was exhausted, she refused to leave. She couldn't bear the thought of Gbenga waking up alone, confused and scared. In that hospital room, Auntie Rose made a vow to herself and to Gbenga. No matter what happened, she would stay with him. She would fight for him when no one else would, and she would remind him that he was not forgotten. That night, after hours of sitting by Gbenga's side, Auntie Rose's exhaustion finally got the better of her. She rested her head on the edge of the hospital bed, her hands still clutching Gbenga's cold, lifeless hand. Sleep came slowly, pulling her into a deep, restless slumber. In her dream, she saw Gbenga. But he wasn't the frail, sick man she had come to care for in his final days. He looked vibrant, young, and handsome, dressed in crisp white clothes. His face glowed, and his smile was as warm as the morning sun. He stood before her, his hands raised as if to calm her. Auntie Rose, he said gently, his voice steady and full of peace. Thank you. Thank you for being there for me when no one else was. I've gone to rest now. Please, don't tell my family what has happened. Let them live with their choices. Auntie Rose's heart ached in the dream. Gbenga, no. Please, don't go, she cried, her voice trembling. Gbenga's smile didn't waver. Let the hospital bury me here in the hospital compound, he continued. Don't let my family come near me. They made their choice, and now, they must live with it. Before she could say anything else, Gbenga began to fade away, his image dissolving into a bright light. Thank you, Auntie Rose, his voice echoed as he disappeared. Auntie Rose jolted awake, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was very quiet except for the faint hum of the machines around her. She looked at Gbenga and gasped. His chest was no longer rising and falling. His face, pale and still, looked almost serene. Benga was gone. Tears poured down her face as she let out a loud, heart-wrenching wail. Benga. No. No, she cried, gripping his hand tightly. Nurses rushed in, trying to calm her, but she couldn't be consoled. Her cries echoed through the hospital, the pain of losing someone who had suffered so much breaking her completely. The hospital staff acted quickly. They informed her after she told them that Benga would be buried immediately in the hospital's small cemetery for unclaimed bodies, as per his wish. Auntie Rose, though devastated, nodded in agreement. She stayed by his side until the very end, watching as they lowered his body into the ground. She whispered a final prayer for him, her tears soaking the earth. Rest in peace, Benga, she said softly, her voice trembling. You deserved so much more than this world gave you. After the burial, Auntie Rose returned home, her heart heavy with grief. The emptiness in her apartment was unbearable, and the silence seemed to echo Benga's absence. She decided she couldn't stay in the neighborhood any longer. She began packing her belongings, determined to leave the memories of Benga's pain and suffering behind. As she stepped outside to leave, she saw a commotion at Benga's house. His wife, Sade, and their children were standing outside with their belongings scattered across the compound. The landlord was shouting angrily, wagging his finger at them. I warned you, didn't I? Months of unpaid rent. Now, leave my house, the landlord barked. Sade and her children tried to argue, but he wouldn't hear a word. I've given you enough chances. Pack your things and go. Auntie Rose watched from a distance, her heart torn between anger and pity. As Sade and her children gathered their things, Sade suddenly spotted Auntie Rose. With a furious expression, she stormed over to her. Auntie Rose, Sade shouted. Go and tell Benga that we've been thrown out of the house. Tell him his sickness has brought shame and suffering to this family. Auntie Rose froze, her anger bubbling to the surface. She had been silent for too long, enduring Sade's cruelty and selfishness. Now, she couldn't hold back anymore. Benga is dead, Auntie Rose thundered, her voice shaking with emotion. He died last night, and has already been buried. He told me not to tell you, but now you've forced me to speak. Sade's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. The children, who had been standing nearby, dropped their bags in shock. Dead? Sade whispered, her voice trembling. No, no, that can't be true. He can't be dead. He's gone. Auntie Rose snapped, her tears flowing freely. The man you abandoned, the man you treated like dirt, is gone. While you were busy hating him, he was fighting for his life. And now, it's too late. Sade fell to her knees, wailing loudly. Benga, forgive me, she cried, pounding the ground with her fists. Her children joined her, their tears mixing with hers as regret consumed them. Auntie Rose stood there, her heart heavy. She had no sympathy left for them. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. Without saying another word, she picked up her bag and turned away. As she walked down the street, her tears continued to fall. She felt an overwhelming sadness, not just for Benga's death, but for the life he had lived, a life of love, sacrifice, and suffering that went unappreciated by the people he cared about the most. But deep inside, Auntie Rose knew she had done everything she could for him. In his final days, she had shown him kindness and dignity, something his family had refused to give. She hoped, wherever he was now, that Benga had found the peace he deserved. With a heavy heart, she boarded a bus, leaving the neighborhood behind forever.